Hello, and welcome back to the final part of this year's Dungeon Build-Along. So, let's jump straight in with this one. Okay then, now, if you remember, when we made the rectangular room in the last episode, there was this piece that we cut away from the middle of the ruined floor texture. And all we're going to do with these pieces is cut those to size. So, as you just saw, I like to start by cutting the straight edge first, and then work on the curve, just like we did with the steps in part 1. So, it really is just a matter of using a sharp knife and taking your time. There's not really much more to say than that. But when that's done, it should end up looking something like this. And we'll then need to do the same thing with the other two pieces. Then, again, just like we did with the stairs, we're going to glue those one on top of the other, doing our best to make sure that the back edge is flush and that they're all nice and centralised. Basically, we're aiming for this kind of thing. However, before we go any further, I am just going to quickly measure the combined height of all three pieces, and mine looks to be around 9mm. Okay, next we'll take this texture and glue that to some thick card, and if you look carefully, there's actually a couple of guidelines on either side. And all we're going to do is measure a distance down from those guidelines that's the same height as all three steps. So, in my example, that's 9mm. And then we can cut away the excess from the bottom. Then it's simply a matter of cutting out the rest of the piece using a sharp pair of scissors, which is all I'm doing here. So yeah, something like that. Next, we'll apply some hot glue to the back of the semicircular platform that we made, and stick that to the bottom of the wall piece, as you can see. And when that's done, this is what we should be left with. So, a stepped dais kind of thing. Okay, next we'll take these two textures and glue those to some thin card, but before we cut them out, we'll need to score them along these lines here, so that when we do cut them out, we can fold them into a kind of pyramid shape. So, something like this. Then we'll cut one piece of a drinking straw around 1/4 of an inch long, and another piece around 1/2 inch, and then we're just going to hot glue the shorter straw into the centre of the smaller star shape, and the longer straw into the centre of the larger star shape. And once that's set, we'll apply some more glue around the sides and the top of the straw, and then kind of push the sides of the little pyramid into that glue, and hold them in place, so that eventually it dries into a solid piece that looks like this. Anyway, I'll just quickly do the exact same thing on the other piece, and that's what that piece should look like, with the idea being that we can glue them together to make a large gemstone. And while you could just glue them together like that, as a bit of an experiment, I'm actually going to cut off the bottom sides, now that the glue is dry, which is a little bit tricky to be honest, but I just wanted to try and bring the two pieces closer together, if that makes sense. Basically, what I'm aiming for is something like this. But yeah, if we apply some glue to the inside of one of those pieces, and then glue them both together, that should result in something with cleaner edges, something that looks a little bit more like an actual gemstone. Anyway, for this next part, I like to take a notice board pin, and we can use that to make a little hole in one of the corners of the gem. Then, if I bring the main piece back in, you'll notice that there's also a small dot roughly in the centre of the piece. And we can use the same pin to punch a hole through that as well, like you can see. And the last thing we'll need for this assembly is just a regular old pin. And all we're going to do is put a generous blob of glue over the hole, push the pin through and make sure it's nice and straight, add some more glue over the end of the pin, and hold it in position so that it's sticking straight out of the wall while it dries. It's a bit hard to see unless it catches the light, but this is the kind of thing that we're trying to achieve. Anyway, here I am just seeing how much of the pin I'm going to need if I want it to look like the gem is hovering above the top step, and cutting away the excess with a pair of clippers. Though, you might want to wear a pair of safety glasses for this part. Then, I'll just do a quick test fit by pushing the pin into the hole that I made earlier, and all we'll need to do then is put a little blob of glue onto the end of the pin, push that inside the gemstone, and hold it in place until it dries, which should result in something that looks like a large gemstone hovering above the dais, with a strange magic circle on the wall behind it. And that's the last bit of terrain for this series done. So all that's left to do now is to see how we can put it to use at the end of the adventure. Right then, so in the last episode we ended things with the party standing in front of the stone door into the final room. And I explained how there were 2 hand-sized depressions in that door, and that each one had an elemental rune carved into the palm. And all the PCs have to do is put one of their own hands into one of these depressions, and that will not only open the door, but it will also determine the kind of challenge they'll face next. However, as I mentioned last time, the runes that appear in the hands, they'll depend upon the choices that the players have made so far. Basically, whether they know it or not, each time they've advanced through this level of the dungeon, they've been determining what happens next. So, for example, at the end of the entrance chamber, they had 4 keys to choose from, but only 3 keyholes, and whatever keys they used, let's say they used the earth, the fire and the water keys, that meant that in the next room they would have had the earth, the fire and the water portals to choose from, and we would have discarded air as a future option. So, again, let's assume that they then chose to pass through the earth portal, and then face the corresponding earth challenge in the previous room. That would then mean that we can also discard earth as an option, which just leaves us with fire and water, and as such, in this particular example, those would be the 2 runes that they find here on the door. So yeah, when they place their hand in one of the depressions, the door will open, and inside they'll see the magic circle upon the back wall, and the large crystal floating in front of it, and upon one side of this there's a large chest, and on the other is a suit of armour. And, not surprisingly, the armour is going to animate and attack the intruders. And depending on what choice the characters just made to enter the room, then you might like to describe it in a few different ways. For example, if they activated the fire rune, then maybe flames flicker through the eye slits of the visor. Or, on the other hand, if they chose water, perhaps it's heavily rusted, and as it moves, water drips from the gaps in the steel plates. Things like that. But to make it a bit more interesting, we're also going to set it up so that at the beginning of each combat round, a magical ray of sorts will shoot out from the gem and empower the armour in a way that matches the same elemental theme, which will last until the start of the next round. And you might like to make up your own charts for this, so that it could be a different effect each round, but like I said in a previous episode, I have been doing a very basic write-up of this adventure, just in a Google Doc, so if you want to see what I've come up with, then there'll be a link to that in the description. But for the sake of completeness, let's continue with the fire example. So, maybe on the roll of a 1, it gains some kind of resistance to attacks made from non-magical weapons. On the roll of a 2 or a 3, its sword is wreathed in flames and causes extra fire damage that round. On a 4 or a 5, anytime one of the PCs are hit, they will catch fire and either have to take fire damage on their turn or spend it smothering the flames. And on a 6, perhaps it gets all of the above. So, you know, that kind of thing. But, like I say, I've written a few ideas down for each elemental type in that file I've mentioned. Anyway, seeing this, the players might try to position their characters between the gem and the armour. Perhaps they want to try and deflect the beam, or foolishly think that they might be able to empower themselves instead. And if this is the case, they'll have to defend against some kind of attack. So, for fire, the gem might make an attack roll that deals fire damage. For air, the character might need to make a saving throw to avoid being struck by lightning. For water, perhaps they risk being knocked off their feet and washed across the room. And for earth, there's a chance that they might get turned to stone for one round. You know, things like that. But as well as facing off against the armour, they also have the option of attacking the gem itself, which will be easier to hit, it being a stationary target, but we're also going to have it set up so that the gem and the armour, they're magically linked, and as such, they're actually sharing the same pool of hit points. And while the gem is easier to hit, every time a character deals damage to it, you might like to judge that they trigger a similar effect to what happens if a character stands in front of the magical beam, like I described earlier. But either way, destroying one also destroys the other. Or perhaps it just renders it inert. Your choice. And on top of all of that, I should mention that there's also the possibility that a character that's suitably skilled, they might try to make sense of the magic circle on the back wall. And with a series of appropriate checks, perhaps a best 3 out of 5, something similar to death saves, they can either dispel the magic powering the gem and the armour, or, if they fail, trigger those defensive measures again, and have to start over. But however they go about it, once either the armour, or the gem, or the magic circle has been dealt with, the archway on the far wall is filled with the swirling energy of another magic portal, which could then simply lead back to the dungeon entrance, or maybe to another deeper level of the dungeon, or even to another plane of existence. That part really is up to you. Though, before they leave, the PCs are probably going to want to check out that treasure chest, and the contents will, again, depend on the choices that they made throughout the dungeon. So, if I use the same examples as before, where they chose the earth, the fire and the water keys, and then stepped through the earth portal, and finally put their hand on the fire rune of this door, that leaves us with the element of water, and the treasure should reflect that. So perhaps it includes a potion of water breathing, expensive jewellery set with aquamarines, a pearl of power, or a ring of water walking, stuff like that. And with that brings us to the end of another level of the dungeon build-along. So I hope you've enjoyed this one. It was a little bit different to the last two levels, but at the same time, still rather linear due to the nature of this format. But yeah, there's probably a few ideas tucked away in there that you can either use as is, or to slot into another adventure if you prefer. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. I also want to say thanks to a few of the people that I play with for letting me run some of these ideas past them, and helping me out with this one. And if you are planning on running some of these encounters yourself, then it'd be good to hear how it goes. So thanks again. Feel free to subscribe or support the Patreon, become a YouTube member, and all of that other nonsense that I'm supposed to say. And yeah, I'll see you next time.